environmental standards. Good purchasing practice can create a win-win situation for brands, manufacturers, and workers. This session will shed lights on the tremendous trends of purchasing practices in global apparel industry, especially in Bangladesh, and how can a better ecosystem can be created through a better purchasing practice. Experts at this session will explore benefiting manufacturers can help the movement to build a transparent and sustainable apparel industry. In this session, we are happy to have the presence of Dr. Mark Anner, Professor of Labor and Employment Relations and Director of the Center for Global Workers' Rights, Penn State University, Mr. Abdullah Hill Rakib, Director of BGMEA and Managing Director of Team Group, Mr. Bas Blau, First Secretary, Economic Affairs and RMG, Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Bangladesh, Ms. Aisha Barenblatt, Founder and CEO of Remake, who will join us virtually, and Mr. Matid Skrieti, Secretary General, International Apparel Federation of IAF, who will also join us virtually, Dr. Najid Draper, Vice President of Research, Better Buyings, Ms. Nazma Akhtar, Founder and Executive Director of Awaj Foundation and President of Shommilito Garment Shromik Federation, and Ms. Honorable Moores, Head of Supply Chain Transformation, Fairwear Foundation. Dr. Najid Draper, Vice President of Research, Better Buying, will moderate this session. Can I please have the moderators and speakers on stage?
Before I get to my presentation, I would like to introduce you to the question for the poll. Better purchasing practices have a huge implication on suppliers and workers. To ensure better purchasing practices, what are the 5 critical areas to be considered? Enhanced transparency between brand and manufacturers on this issue, setting minimum floor price for order, consumer awareness, use of technologies such as blockchain, strengthening regulation and providing guidelines, and initiating sustainability index-based pricing by brand. So I'll invite you to vote for the answer, and so on. I can show you the result at the end of this panel. So I'm going to move over fast this presentation. So we are here in Bangladesh, one of the major sourcing country. And one of the questions we would like to answer is how a country or industry association use comparative data. This is what we are doing at Better Buying. We do research, collect data on purchasing practices. And why do we do that? To drive change. So what can we do with comparative data? So we looked at the results and compared the 2019 and 2021 Better Buying Purchasing Practice Index for Bangladesh. And as you can see, we see a positive improvement on most areas. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see like demanding level prices to be maintained from year to year did increase. Sharing competitors' bids, so this type of practices that put pressure on pricing did show improvements between 2019 and 2021. Some high also pressure technique such as take it or leave it to meet a target cost has also improved between 2019 and 2021. For Bangladesh, so Bangladesh actually is doing well in that area when it comes to cost covering compliant production. And we compared it between China and Vietnam. And if you look at the results for how much cost covering was about, Bangladesh did the best. One of the other key findings between 2019 and 2021 is about planning and forecasting. How many days in advance did Bangladeshi suppliers receive the order? And unfortunately, we saw a decrease on that area, meaning that supplier in Bangladesh have seen less visibility. However, we have seen an improvement when it comes to order that are priced on compliant production. So why the data and the participation of suppliers is important? So we have two different types of population, the industry, the BGMA and BKMA, and for individual suppliers. So the industry association will have access to detailed and yearly updated data through all 7 categories of purchasing practices. And we can answer questions such as what are the main challenges Bangladeshi suppliers face in their buyer-supplier relationship. And one of the answers is to support their suppliers member by advocating for custom design plan from buyer that improve this relationship. For individual suppliers, they get to better understand their own buyer-supplier relationship. That's one of the advantages they get by participating. And by doing so, they will get to become a better partner and an active partner. That's the important part, like becoming an active partner in improving its business relationship. And when we talk about improving this relationship, one of the things we can see is negotiating better terms, co-creating solutions with their buyer in a win-win relationship, and tracking progress over time. One of the things that we do over at BBI is like we collect data yearly, which allow us to compare result year over year and track progress. So one of the questions I would like to ask the panel over here is, do the problem area that suppliers are reporting in Bangladesh tally with what you are seeing on the ground? And potentially, I know we have Fairway here if they want to give like a brand perspective. And how do we encourage more brands to be transparent about the data? That's one of the main challenge, like sharing data once they get it, like sharing the data publicly. So sharing their score on their ESG report or sustainability report. Like how do we get these data out in the open, in the public? What are the key barriers to that? And how can they be overcome? What is the role of supplier association in securing transparency and MSIs? So I'm going to introduce, and hopefully we'll get the answer to this question as the rest of the panel make their presentation. I'm going to introduce Professor Mark Anner. And so we noticed that the continuous price pressure and workers' rights in suppliers' factory, how to evaluate the correlation and what supplier can do to break this vicious cycle? Can we have Doctor's Anner presentation on the screen, please?
Thank you for that introduction, and it's wonderful to be here. My deepest thanks to the organizers and the invitation to join you. So this question of purchasing practices and working conditions and workers' rights, let me just quickly run through. I know Better Buying has a longer list, but I in my research, focus on 4 purchasing practices, sort of look at some of the numbers that I'm seeing in these areas, and then make that link between these purchasing practices and working conditions, workers' rights. Right. So I look at 4 different areas. Pricing, that's an actual graph of the numbers, an older graph I did. I map it out with changes in the industry. Some of them were outlined in the opening session today, including the phase out of the multi-fiber arrangement. You can see that steep decline in prices. Speed to market considerations, order fluctuations, which makes it very difficult to know how many workers to hire over time. And lastly, late payments. So these are just 4 of the many purchasing practices we can consider. What does some of the data tell us? Well, I showed you the earlier graph on prices. If you map that out over time, that sort of squeeze down on price, over a 25-year period, the average year-on-year decline is about 2.1%. Following the initial COVID crisis and those ordering cancellations, year-on-year, the prices went down by 13%. I looked at July 2019 to July 2020. And then through survey data, we looked at delay in payments, and we see a 79% increase. So normally these are 0 days out, 30 days, 45, 90 days, and so on. We're seeing a significant number with 180-day out payments, but the average becomes 77 days following the initial COVID crisis. This is the absolute latest. Those of you who follow data from the US OTEXA, they released last week data for exports for March. So when I look at, for the US, this is the trade data for the US, Bangladesh's major export is men's and boys' cotton trousers, code 347. You see it year by year, and the last box is for March 2022. The blue line is the nominal dollars. The orange line is when I control for inflation. We see over a 10-year period a 17% decline. But when we control for inflation, which is so significant now, we see a 34% decline. So the price squeeze is real. It's showing up in the trade data. It's really quite significant. I did a real quick attempt to get in a sort of a questionnaire and when I arrived here, and I got 12 suppliers responded. So just to give you this very small, quick survey I did, have you accepted orders below cost this year, 2022? 83% said yes. Are buyers imposing longer payment terms now relative to 2019? 92% say yes. So the correlation, the key question you're asking between this and working conditions, this is how I see it, how this relationship plays out. Certainly the price squeeze on suppliers will contribute to a squeeze on wages and also a squeeze in work intensity. So if wages go up through a minimum wage increase, one response is then to increase the production targets. Of course, it can affect health and safety, it can affect gender-based violence and harassment at work, which we can discuss. The second, the lead time squeeze on suppliers and order fluctuations. This, I think, leads to uneven work schedules, obligatory overtime in some cases, so it's also a serious concern. Lastly, delayed payments to suppliers can contribute to delayed payments to workers, and in the worst case scenario, it could result in problems in securing credit. It seems to me once you get beyond 90 days out in those payments, you really have a trouble with the cash flow in the credit system. And in a worst case scenario, this could lead to a factory closing. So sorry, let me go back. Oh, it doesn't matter. So what can be done to, let me try to go back. Can I go back? Yeah, there we go. And this was just a quick question on this. This is just this really short survey I did. If current purchasing practices continue, what might be the impact on your workers? So these are questions that just came in the last 2 or 3 days. A low wage increase, permanent layoffs, temporary layoffs, increase in worker production targets, or an inability to raise wages. So these are suppliers responding to this question, and we see them confirming the potential adverse impacts on workers of these practices. So my last slide, which is the big question, what can be done to break the cycle? I'm suggesting, I think a lot of people here would share this and work towards this, is a bottom-up process. I think the idea, and looking at the COVID experience of suppliers working together more effectively to set guidelines for purchasing practices is really quite crucial, not just in Bangladesh, but throughout the industry. And I think we see that in the STAR network. What I think the next step should be is that the STAR network and workers and worker organizations start discussing what I would call total costing for decent work. So when we get to this question of best purchasing practices, I think workers' voices are crucial to that discussion. Then I think you need to enter into the discussion after that bottom-up process with buyers on total costing for decent work. And if there's a disagreement, I think buyers must show with full transparency how their purchasing practices allow for decent work. I think we might be moving from a world in which I feel as a worker rights advocate constantly being asked the question, well, what's the business case for what you're proposing? We might be moving to a world in which buyers might be asked to answer the question is, can you make the ethical case for your prices? So again, I think after that we enter into a discussion again. There's a need to review the numbers, and through this collaboration dialogue, if you will, the need to arrive at total cost for decent work and through the pricing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Abdullah Haqib, Director of BGMA and Managing Director of Team Group. Mr. Haqib, despite so much success, the price of apparel product in decreasing. We also have seen non-payment issues, especially during COVID. What is BGMA's stand on this sensitive issue?
Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening to me. And what your question have two parts. One is the price, and one was the most unfortunate challenges that we faced. We saw the reality that partnering us was not really available at the crisis time. You see, what I feel that from BGMA, what we need to establish a partnership. I believe each of the previous speakers has emphasized the point that we have to think in one single team. Who we are, the manufacturer and the workers are producing for our correct partners in the globe. And sitting in Europe or in USA, you have to believe that this is your single committed team sitting here producing for you. Talk about environmental protection. We talk about environmental sustainability. We talk about workers' wages or occupational health and safety. We talk about social commitments. See, the thing is, the garments industry after 2013, after Rana Plaza, the entrepreneurs has been very resilient to invest, to come back to the stage of labeling them to be a secured, sustainable working place. And this investment we have done unconditionally without having any commitment from any of the stakeholders globally. Now, what do you expect us to do further? You do not support us even when we absolutely was helpless, when we talk about COVID situation, when you should be a partner supporting us, we withdraw. But well, I actually do not want to say at large because most of the partners was compliant and supportive. Even though there were some delays in payments, there was discounts, which actually ended up getting some of the manufacturers to have crisis cash flow wise. At the same time, like you mentioned, that 90 days, beyond 90 days, we have crisis. Now, we have 180 days, we have almost 5 months. So how did you think that we managed? Today, a lot of our manufacturers are struggling. A lot of them are almost at the verge of going for Chapter 11. The bank is not supporting them. So from BGMA, what is our approach, like to establish the network like STAR, like you mentioned, to have our alignment that we have to, Dr. Hawk was been very strong to say that we have to send this equal message to our customers, partners. They have to feel we are single team. The pollution happened here due to the fashion, is just not for the manufacturer's responsibility. It is a responsibility, and it is a one single team's responsibility. It's the customer, it's the factory owners, and of course the government bodies. Now, you say that financing is available. You talk about, you give me a car, but I do not know how to buy the petrol. So how do you expect me to continue driving that car? So the price has to be sustainable in terms of securing environmental sustainability, worker sustainability in terms of paying them affordable living price, and at the same time in terms of having the entrepreneurs having a correct ROI. If the entrepreneur end of 10 years and he cannot repay his loan, you expect my son to continue this business? Never. So if we want to have a hand-holded proper continuous situation, we have to think in a single goal. Look, we have one single planet. Either you sit in USA or in Europe, you still are responsible for the pollution what is your product is doing in Bangladesh. Regardless, the factory owners is not aware, not being responsible for doing that, to make sure that the environment is protecting and environment is not polluted and the workers having the proper wages. We are responsible. We have to be a single team, not a separate team. We cannot live separately anymore. So the request from BGM platform is that think a single team, and we all have to commit. There are every cost being covered by the manufacturer alone. Now come to the environmental cost. Each of the segment has a cost. Ethical trading have a cost. Environmental assurance have a cost. Carbon emission have a cost. A proper wage have a cost. The price is declining. 2014 until 2021, minus 10% price-wise. But the material-wise, it went up almost 56%. Where is your commitments? Where is the commitments? We have to believe that we are a single team and we have to solve this problem together. And I must say that it is late, but let's work together from this platform at least. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. I'd like to remind our panel to be short so we can get through all the speakers. I'd like to introduce Mr. Bas Blau, First Secretary, Economic Affairs and RMG, Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Bangladesh. So Netherlands has always been very instrumental in supporting the RMG industry of Bangladesh, but we are still living in a price-based purchasing practice. In the free market economy, the buyer play a dominating role. What else can we do? What can be undone to get out of that cycle?
Thank you very much, and I'll do my best to keep it short. Thanks a lot for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here more than 2 years after the previous event took place. For the Netherlands, we are, as many other countries, in a transition in our relationship with Bangladesh. That means that from a relationship that is built on over 50 years of mainly development, we're increasingly focusing on trade and investment. And that means that the way we work is changing a little bit, but the themes and topics don't change. So RMG will remain a priority in the years to come for the Netherlands, although we might start working in slightly different ways. And that's because, I mean, much has changed in the sector. I think Bangladesh has made a tremendous transformation, and that the garment sector in Bangladesh is now one of the most compliant in the world. And we increasingly want to focus on those themes where we feel that we can still make a difference, where there's still space for improvement. Purchasing practices, of course, is one of those. And perhaps even the most important one, because in the end, purchasing practices are at the core of anything you want to do on sustainability. And you're right, despite all the advances that are made over the years, these time and price pressures are still firmly in place. And I think there was no more painful moment, as the BGMA colleague also said, to witness that in practice, what that meant. And yes, the free market is all fine, but not to the point where we ask suppliers to comply, but then disincentivize them in doing so. We have a saying in the Netherlands, and sayings never translate that well, but I think this one does. And it goes like this: buying cheap is buying expensive. And it means that if the price is so low that you're going to end up, that something's going to be wrong with it. You can't buy a bus ticket and expect to fly. So I think that we need to come to practicing models that build on enduring partnerships. It's more complex. Prices are an incredibly important component there, but it's more than prices alone. It's about an enabling environment that we jointly shape. We're talking about transparency on the supplier side, but also on the buyer side. We're talking about the use of technology, and we're also talking about regulation. Much of the discussion takes place in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, but the Netherlands also believes that this discussion should take place outside of Bangladesh too. Professor Anner already referred to the STAR network as a good example. I think there's similar dynamics going on in Brussels, in Geneva, for the various tracks that are happening towards making the sector more sustainable across the board. Because that level playing field is the only way to ultimately sustain purchasing practices that are fair and transparent. In order to keep supporting the Bangladeshi garment sector and as a broader objective to support the diversification of the economy here in Bangladesh, the Netherlands will be at your side to work on fair wages, to work on transparency, to work on fair purchasing practices. We'll be at your side for the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bas. Now let me introduce Matthias Kriete, Secretary General, International Apparel Federation, who's joining us virtually. Hi, Matthias.
Hello.
Here's my question for you. In international apparel business, brands always play the decision-making role. Can IAF take an initiative to evaluate the performance of brands? What is your recommendation to manufacturers and buyers to better the buying practices?
Yes, thank you. And I'm really glad to be here, even though it's not physically. At least the technology seems to enable me to be with you. And in answering that question, I would like to expand a little bit on the initiative that was earlier announced by several speakers, coined the STAR initiative. Actually, it's fully called the STTI, which stands for Sustainable Terms of Trade Initiative. And this was set up by the STAR network of Asian manufacturing associations, the International Apparel Federation, which is the organization that I lead. The BGMEA has been extremely active in setting up this Sustainable Terms of Trade initiative, as it is member of both the STAR network and the IAF. It is greatly supported by the GIZ, the German Development Agency, both financially and in practice. And it has as a project partner also Better Buying Initiative. There is a strong link with the OECD and therefore very much linked to the due diligence guidance for the garment and garment and footwear industry, which is so important for defining the concept of purchasing practices. So this STTI is really a unique manufacturer-driven initiative which is focused on creating fairer purchasing practices. And what is important, and this I think is answering part of your question, is that this initiative joins together 15 industry associations from 11 countries. So there is a global collaboration, there is a global movement of manufacturing associations, which is really unique and which is, one could say, also setting the tone for other stronger, more structural involvement of manufacturers in many of these, not just purchasing practices, but many of these challenges that the industry faces. So in coming out and defining what we did as STTI, the concept of commercial compliance, we turned the compliance intentionally around, saying, okay, manufacturers face the need for compliance from their clients, but buyers, the clients of the manufacturers, also need to be compliant to a set of purchasing practices as defined by manufacturers. That was the real change that happened. And in coming out, this group of 15 associations has communicated that it represents more than 3/4 of global manufacturing capacity. And that has really made an impact, because this is a movement that is impossible to ignore by buyers. And then we come to the point of what needs to happen. You know, once the attention is there, I think it has been mentioned many times that collaboration is the key. The challenges that the industry faces are simply too large to be able to tackle in the traditional way, in a siloed way, where different components of the supply chain were trying to solve the problems, and one component was imposing solutions or actions on the other component. It only works because it's a systemic problem if there's a collaboration. So the same is true for purchasing practices. Apart from what STTI is doing, is trying to create some globally accepted guardrails. There's also the need for brands and their buyers to really also using the data that is collected by organizations like Better Buying, dive into their operations and see how jointly these purchasing practices can be improved. And sometimes it really has to do with the system, right? Because what we often see is that modern market requirements, for instance, flexibility that is being asked, are squeezed into an old-fashioned sourcing system. That is where it doesn't work. The old-fashioned reflexes of buyers that are incentivized in a certain way don't match up with the need to collaborate more closely with suppliers. And buyers are starting to realize that in order to deliver to the market what they need, and this is not just in terms of products, but also in terms of the people they try to attract. And they need to collaborate more closely with the manufacturers. Even the labor conditions in Bangladesh have an influence on the ability of companies in Europe to attract personnel. It's not easy, it's getting harder to attract the right people to work for fashion companies in Europe. And part of the reason for this is that young people don't want to work in an industry which they feel is treating its people unfairly. So all of these things are connected. All the more important that we all work together. Manufacturing associations work together, and on joint platforms, they work together with brands and retailers in collaborating, improving purchasing practices, and as such creating a better industry.
Thank you.
So that was my reply.
Thank you, Matthias. I would like to introduce now Aisha Barenblatt, founder and CEO of Remake, who I believe is joining us virtually. Hello, Aisha. Here's my question for you. Industrialization and sustainability always have a negative correlation, unfortunately. The mission of Remake is to change the scenario. How far have you been successful in your mission? How the purchasing practices can make a win-win solution for all?
Thank you so much for having me. I wish I could have been there in person, but so delighted to be here virtually. For me, this conversation of purchasing practices is an old one, right? We have been talking about this as an industry for more than 30 years in terms of making sure that there is a partnership, as some of my colleagues were mentioning. But for us, as an advocacy organization based here in California, we really saw the power of how we can push for this during the pandemic. We were the people behind the now viral Pay Up campaign. And what ended up happening was a true partnership where colleagues from BGMEA shared what was happening with us along with other manufacturers in terms of order cancellations, discounts during a time when we really needed solidarity and partnership because supply chains were really hurting from an unprecedented pandemic. And we know, in looking at the data, Professor Mark Hanner has looked at this data, that upwards of $40 billion was canceled in contracts at the start of the pandemic for orders that had already been produced, for orders that were in process, for fabric that had been bought. And our community really galvanized. For us at Remake, we reached millions of citizens. We got hundreds of press hits. We went viral on social media. We had closed door conversations with brands, really to say for all of your public commitments to purchasing practice. Here we are during a global pandemic when what suppliers and workers need is your solidarity, and instead you're shoring up your own cash flow at the expense of workers. And we won. We didn't win every brand. There remains, ongoing fights in terms of wage cap, but we were, as a community, all of us, manufacturers, unions, citizen organizations, press, new and old media, able to recover upwards of $22 billion in those order cancellations. And so, to your point on how can we continue to push for a responsible industry, the answer is that we have to, learning from the pandemic, be brave. I invite any of the manufacturers, EGMEA, our union colleagues who are present, to be in partnership with us to continue to shine a light on prices. It's something that we as an organization remain very interested in, to publicly shine a light on how we're seeing a downward depression on price. We have also looked at the unclean nature of contracts during the pandemic. A lot of manufacturers, especially those who entered bankruptcy, sharing with us how the terms within the contracts are completely one-sided. And so I truly believe for us as civil society, we are really interested in transparency, in holding buyers accountable to the prices they're paying, no more having collaboration or conversations about sustainability behind closed doors. The more we make this publicly available data, the more we can galvanize press and regulators and citizens to take notice that for brands, whether they want to talk about their science-based targets around the environment or their human rights policies, that the prices that they pay have to match those goals and to put their money where their mouth is. And so for us at Remake, PIAP was really an example of how collaboration and all of us coming together can really push for good solutions and put money in the hands of workers. And I really do think that any future purchasing practices conversations have to do exactly that. Put power back in the hands of workers, and for us to really do that in solidarity. So I thank you so much for having me and look forward to this very timely conversation.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you very much, Aisha. We still have two speakers. So let me introduce Ms. Nazma Akhtar, founder and executive director of Awaj Foundation and president of Somilito Garments Ceramic Federation. Nazma, the Bangladeshi economy heavily depends on the RMG industry. You have seen in the COVID period around $3 billion worth of order had been canceled or put on hold. How the situation can be avoided, and what is your expectation, especially from the brands?
Thank you, the panelists and all the distinguished guests. Actually, what we expect from the brand, that is the one issue, but also we want from the commitment from the government as well as the supplier too. So if I'm going to talk what is our commitment, first of all, the power should be equally distributed from the brand to supplier, supplier to the workers. And systemic change is very needed because the apex section or whatever decision are adapted by the European market or American, Australian market, That should not be like that, because it should be bottom to top, top to bottom approach, which is realistic and which is needed for the country like Bangladesh. That kind of the decision should be made by the Bangladesh workers, government, as well as the supplier. If I'm talking about the what is the aspect from that, no hunger, no slave, that is more important. The purchasing practice, this is not new issue for us. We are screaming and shouting year and year, decade and decade. But do they listening? No. The pandemic time, when the brand are cancellation, holding, and suspension, the end, when they're asking for discount, the Bangladeshi garments workers in 2020, the April salary, they gave discount 30%, 35%. So it's a shame. This industry is more than 40 years, and 1 month salary without work when the workers are not getting. It's shame for everyone. The Europe, America, as well as my country, the how fashion industry are exploiting and denying their right and responsibility. So these the issues, how we can make better sustainable industrial relation, because Bangladesh government as well as the other government also trying to achieve Agenda 2030 and 17 goal and over 50 target. No hunger, climate change, environmental issue, education, nutrition, economical growth and decent work, lot of gender. So this kind of issue, as long as it's not affected in the business, the things will be not achieved, and we cannot achieve the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goal. If we are talking about this issue, first we need to talk about the environmental issue, living wages, freedom of association and collective bargaining, women's representation and leadership in the factory level, otherwise it will be on. We are talking about the living wages. We are fighting for the living wages. But you know, very unfortunately, recently, one of the factory, our affiliate, submit the charter of demand in the factory, and they don't want to increase the financial benefit, only non-financial things they want. Then we also talk with the brand and asking, can you help us? The company is talking like this. And then one of the renowned brand in Bangladesh, they said we cannot do anything because we are not paying fair and we are not giving the fair price. How do we talk in this? And when I'm talking with another brand, they said the collective bargaining is not in our contents. Another brand, they said, you know, if there will be so much money, how do you aspect this? If the business are talking like this, and especially brand are talking their goal, what will be happen in 2030 or 2060 or 2020, so many things they are saying, but it seems like a fake and not committable. So that commitment is very important, how they have to give the fair prices. COVID pandemic, it was not affected the supplier, it was because our Prime Minister gave huge money for the backup. The brand are discounting and they get also discount, but our country, the rural economic and the workers borrow money for the surviving. So that kind of issue we need to be think, and from the brand we want that the climate justice, environmental issues, living wages, freedom of expression, freedom of talk, and freedom of association, and right to organize, right to bargaining. No gender-based violence, sexual harassment. It's increased day by day in the factory, but there is no action. So we need this kind of commitment from them. Please give the power to supplier when they reorder or new order come, to at least they can talk, this is the cost and we need to be fulfilled. But you are not talking about that, only you are giving, if you like this order, and you have to do it. Also, I am requesting for the supplier, please be strong yourself and learn how to negotiation and how to protect. Because this country, we are mid-income country. If we are income country, the BGME salary and the garments workers' salary, if there is no stability, I don't think this country will be continue survive. So that is why we need to be balanced and good approach. We want to constructive industrial relation and we want to better industry because cheap labor, that concept need to be stopped. Labor market is cheap. That make the slavery, that is the slave. So we don't want that. The European market, the European Union, the legal binding legislation, guideline, it is need to be improved. No penalty for the brand, no penalty for the supplier. If the workers raise their voice, when they demand something, they are arrested, they are blacklisted, they went to prison. So that kind of systemic change we need, and power should be equally distributed. And the main thing, the workers should be get their main voice, how to negotiation, how to approach and how the things, because that kind of approach is very much absent, and we need to be collaborate, we need to work together. This is the global business we know, but it should not only depend on the Bangladeshi workers and women's and blood and sweat. And no more Rana Plaza, we don't want. Because if they are not increased and not giving the value of the workers, if cheap labor, it can be continue and it can be happen. So that is why this kind of things need to be think yourself, need to be do something for yourself, otherwise it won't be work. We are talking about the climate change and climate issue. See how affected Bangladesh and how the corporate dumping are affected in our country. I'm the only representative for workers. Please give me some time to talk. So, these kind of things need to be no pollution, no affected the environment. This is also need to be affected. And also, women's workers, after 40, they cannot work in the industry because due to malnutrition, long working hour, production pressure. But as per law, 60 years women can work. So these are the discrimination, these are the exploitation, and I'm not saying it's a modern day slavery, because it's slavery from the very beginning, very day by day. So these kind of things need to be think and address. And also the workers, they must be priority, and we want dignified working condition, respect and dignity from the brand, how to ensure workers better life and livelihood, because after Rana Plaza, the infrastructure, the safety is ensuring, but Rana Plaza, people are committed for decent work, living wages, freedom of expression, no hunger, no discrimination, but still it is continue, and it is very much a difficult time we are passing. So, again, the supplier, I request also you, please be strong and negotiation yourself as a brand. Lot of dialogue, lot of workshop, seminar, conference, talking about the living wages, sustainability, lot of things. But in ground, which is needed for the workers, which is needed for the industry, that has to be think. Because the people are giving so much attention on the charity, but nobody is thinking about the profit share and the fair prices. So we don't want to charity. We want our profit share. We want fair prices. Fair price, fair wages, that is the aspect from the brand as well as the supplier as well as the government should negotiation properly, and supplier and workers should negotiation their things in the factory level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nesma. I would like to introduce now Annabelle Mers, Head of Supply Chain Transformation at Fairwear Foundation. Annabelle, current business and purchasing practices have a negative social and environmental impact. What measures supply chain actors, brands, and manufacturers can take to minimize these externalities to achieve like holistic change?
Thank you, Najat. Thank you for the organizers. I'll say a few closing remarks and we'll keep it short. we as Fairwear also have a long-standing belief that you cannot change workplace practices without changing practices of brands. It's been said a lot, respecting human rights is a shared responsibility. And we've seen it all, we agree upon this, that there's a lot of this responsibility, liability and financial risk placed on the supplier. However, we at Fairwear, we are a multi-stakeholder initiative from Europe, working with many European brands who are taking this responsibility seriously. Luckily, we have amazing examples of brands increasing their prices to support wage increases. We have brands doing stable forecasting. We have brands working with the supplier, setting up worker management dialogue, facilitating that, long partnerships, and this is the examples that we want to set and share with everyone. However, we cannot do it alone. The brands that we work with in Europe only represent a small percentage of the industry, so we need others, and therefore Fairwear has been working for several years to collaborate within Europe to set a common framework to reach consensus on responsible purchasing practices. And I encourage you, my friend from the BGMEA, to look at that common framework of responsible purchasing practices, as a lot of brands in Europe have agreed to that and are committed to that. But now we are at the point, of course, to really put that in practice and hold brands accountable for it. This framework is widely available for everyone to use, so I encourage you in the audience, have a look at it. The same goes as Fairwear has a methodology to assess a brand's purchasing practices. It's called the brand performance check, also for the industry to use. These are all ways where we look at really good practices and share that in the industry. So hopefully we can work together and set an example, continue this. I know we've been speaking a lot this morning about Bangladesh being compliant. With the EU legislation coming up, it's time for brands to also be compliant. And this is something where we are really working and achieving a lot. So let's continue this progress, both in the factories in Bangladesh, as well as progress at the brands. So I'll leave it to that, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Annabelle. Just to conclude quickly, you can see that purchasing practices hinges a lot on data and how we collect this data. So for Bangladesh supplier, I invite, especially if you're a retailer representative or a supplier, to get in touch with us, because there is a power in number. The more we participate, the more you participate, the better we can improve purchasing practices. If we know what we're talking about by collecting data, we can drive change. Thank you very much to all our panel members. And I'm going to just quickly show you the result of the poll. So it looks like that the main area that should be considered to improve purchasing practices is enhanced transparency between brand and manufacturer, which is also directly linked to data, how brand are willing to share results from either scoring on this area or not. And I think also what's come next is initiating sustainability index based on pricing. Of course, pricing is always up there as far as like an area of improvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Najat Draper.
Yes, we have a question from the audience, so if you can just keep it.
Thank you very much. I have this question to Ms. Nazma Akhtar ma'am. Ma'am, since you already mentioned some of the factors and major points and issues, I wanted to ask you, what initiatives do you think are being taken by the employers and the governments for the laborers or workers regarding their wages or salaries comparing to the works being done and the time of works, considering the international aspects or factors in Bangladesh? Like, what do you think about that? And also you mentioned some points regarding the women leadership and workers. What initiatives are specially being taken for them, for their works, and if they're getting enough payment for that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I think we need to be amendment some of the law, because we have only the minimum wage guidelines in our law, but we need to be also ensuring the living wage legislation. And you know, the day by day, the Bangladesh, the price hike, inflation are increasing. Now, you know, the last week, 1 liter cooking oil, 1 liter cooking oil just increased recently last week, almost 30 taka. So the ratio of the price in the living cost, they have to think about the workers' wages and benefit. Because as the challenges and difficulties, I'm not saying the hypocrisy, but the double standard role in the globally, that's also difficult. So that is why the Bangladesh government and manufacturer should take the action for the fair price, the rationing system, housing, low price, education, and also many other religious and health, these kind of things. Collaborationally, the government and manufacturer has to think. And also the many important thing, the social protection issue is very important. I forget that time to tell, because during the COVID-19, what we listen and learning, because the manufacturer doesn't have the reserve money, the brand didn't pay the bill on time, so that is why they couldn't pay the worker's salary also. That is why the brand, supplier, and government has to ensure the social protection system and reserve money. If there is any crisis moment, they have to pay their workers, and they have to not feel insecure, because in our garments, workers are very much insecure. So that is the issue we need to work. And the leadership, what we are talking, the women's, because you know, the auto machine also killed the women's job, but still we have over 60% women are working in there. But if you see the BGMEA, number of the manufacturer are the men, and if you are going to the production floor, the man, boss or mid-level management are also men, but 60% women are working there. So that is why we need to be the workers' voice and workers' representation from there. So for our organization, in our union, we are working for women leadership and giving a lot of training and awareness. And where the union we have, 80% female are in the leadership position, and we educated them responsible leadership, rights and responsibility, productivity, also how to negotiation and increase their wages at the workplace. So that's the way the government and other all need to be worked. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Naisma.
Thank you so much, Dr. Najid Draper, for moderating the session so well, and thank you very much, honorable speakers, for giving us your insights. I would like to request you to stand up for a group photograph.